What is it showing as right now?
It's your name. Perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
so that's fine. Okay, great. I'm sorry. Let me move.
Good morning, everyone. I am Patrick Pavlak, and I'm Executive Officer at the Brussels office of the EU Institute for Security Studies. I'm also Project Director for the EU Cyber Direct, the EU Cyber Diplomacy Initiative. And one of our objectives is to promote multi-stakeholder engagement in cyber-related debates on a whole range of issues. So we are extremely happy to partner with CEPISA again this year, and other organizations, of course, for this year's Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa. To those watching us on YouTube or on the Whova conference platform or in the webinar, please remember that you can join the discussion via the Q&A function. And of course, if you would like to tweet about the session, please use hashtag FIFAAfrica21. This session is also interpreted into sign language. Now, let me maybe start by providing a short background on the conversation we're going to have today. I think we all agree that trust is one of the basic foundations of digital connectivity. We engage in interactions on the internet, whether it's communications, payments, or dating, because we trust in the legal, regulatory, and technological solutions, such as standards that have been put in place. In other words, they are the precondition for the global open and free internet as we know it. The purpose of the session is to look at some of the most recent developments and those different levels, and how they might have a long-lasting impact on the future of the internet and internet governance. So the discussion about standards in particular has become very political and tainted by big powers competitions over the past years and months that challenges some of the key foundations of the current bottom-up internet governance. To discuss these issues and many others, I have with me 5 excellent speakers, and I'll introduce them in a random order before we jump to the presentations. On the panel today, we have Onika Makwakwa, who is the head of Africa in the Alliance for Affordable Internet at the World Wide Web Foundation, where she focuses on advancing good practices in policy and regulatory frameworks for affordable and meaningful access to broadband. Then there we have David Bekele, who is a regional vice president for Africa at the Internet Society. David has also worked as a consultant for major international organizations such as the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNESCO, and the World Bank. Then we have Cedric Mbayet, who is Infrastructure Unit Manager at Afrinic. Cedric leads the infrastructure unit, which strives to provide IT strategy, system services to support Afrinic mission, vision, and core systems in critical internet infrastructure. Estef Sanz joins us from the European Commission, where he's a head of sector for internet governance and multi-stakeholder dialogue with a long career in the service of the European Commission. And then finally, Daniel Mwesigwa, who is a project officer for ICT for Democracy and Civic Participation at CEPISA. He's a fervent tech commentator on issues about the openness of the internet, startups, and entrepreneurship in Africa. And Daniel gets extra points for joining us very early in the morning. It's 3 a.m. where he is, so please pay particular attention to his presentation. I'm not an expert on the topic, so I very much look forward to learning from all of you. And I would again like to remind everyone on the session that you also have interpretation in English and French available if you'd like to follow in other language. Now, before we really jump at the topic, I would maybe like to give each of you an opportunity to address a very general question that I myself had ahead of this session, which is that of how is the internet access in Africa evolving and how current developments in the standardization bodies, in particular, all the competition between the major powers more broadly, impact those processes. And I think I'm going to start with David, who, if I understand correctly, is going to provide us a bit of a background on how the internet infrastructure and system have evolved on the continent over the past year. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me for this important session. Yes, I'm going to start by providing maybe a background for the discussion. Maybe not all of you have been around and following the progress in connectivity in Africa in the last decades, and I would like to give you some background so that it can help the discussion. Until maybe 2009, the progress of internet connectivity in Africa was very, very slow. The internet penetration for the whole of Africa was less than 5%, and for many countries it was less than 1%. But in 2009, there was considerable increase of connectivity in most African countries. However, today, even though we have reached almost a third of the population of Africa having access to the internet, there is still high disparity between countries. There are some countries that have very high connectivity, like Mauritius, while others are lagging behind. How did this happen? It happened because of many infrastructure development. As you can see in the figure at the right side, at the left side, when it started in 2000, there was no fiber optics coming to Africa, but then there was the SAT3 that connected the western part of Africa. And then after 2009, many submarine cables reached Africa, making international connectivity cheaper and cheaper. As you can see in the right side, there are today many submarine cables arriving to Africa and changing completely the scenario that existed before 2009. With regards to the backbone within the continent, that has also changed considerably. Many countries have invested on terrestrial infrastructure. As you can see here, there are lots of countries that have really quite developed infrastructure within their countries. However, there are some others that are still lagging behind. You can see, for example, in around Central Africa, what is in red is what is planned and is not yet there. So there is still some way to go, but there has been a lot of progress. And with regard to the contribution of internet for the economy, in 2009, there was, in 2019, the internet-related GDP, that is called IGDP, was around 100 billion for Africa, which is about 3.9% of the GDP, which is good, but we expect that it will grow, and by 2025, it will, according to some studies, it will reach 5.2, and it will reach 8.5% by 2050. Having said that, there are some countries where it has already reached a high level. For example, in Kenya, 7.7% of the GDP comes from the internet economy, while in others, like the country where I am, Ethiopia, it's still very low, with only 1.27% of the GDP. That internet economy is mainly focused on fintech, e-commerce, and more healthcare, media and entertainment, e-mobility and food delivery, as well as B2B logistics. With regards to the question on the table today, I believe it's very important that Africa needs to benefit from its investment. Until now, Africa has invested a lot on the infrastructure, but has not yet benefited for its economy yet. it's true that investment in the sector is improving, as you can see in the figure. It's really increasing rapidly, but we are still not at a level that is necessary. But this cannot be achieved without an open, secure, and trusted internet. In order to have new investments, in order to have innovation, we need to have an internet that everybody can access, but that is also secure enough for people to trust it. And we need to have everybody included, and which is not currently the case, because especially in the rural areas and some countries are not yet included. And when we see why the internet has been successful in other regions of the world, we see that at the core of that there are the internet standards. They are open, they are developed openly, and we know that without open standards, we wouldn't have the extraordinary development of internet and the applications around it that we have seen in the last few decades. Of course, there are challenges. Security is a challenge. In Africa, many governments are concerned about OTTs. We see increasing amount of concentration. For example, the big companies are not giving enough opportunities for the smaller ones. But I think we can find a solution without changing the internet. The internet has evolved and will continue to evolve. And if we Africans are not happy with that evolution, I think the best way to weigh in is by involving in the existing processes. For example, if we are not happy with the standards, there is opportunity, as the standardization is an open process, we can involve and participate. In fact, some of us have been working in that area, especially in trying to promote the participation of Africans in IETF processes, and a working group at AFRINIC will be created soon so that we can all participate in the development of new standards at IETF. And what I would like to say also is sometimes when people are not happy with what is happening on the internet, they come with a completely new ideas that would completely break the internet. And I don't think this is a solution, because all the investment that we have put on the internet will not be protected if we break it. So I think we have to be careful. It's very important that it evolves. It's very important that the internet takes into consideration the needs of Africa, but it's also important to protect the properties that have made the internet what it is today. Thank you.
Thank you, David. This is indeed a great introduction to the discussion we're going to have. I liked in particular the fact that you really made the connection between the real impact of what we're talking about, standards on people's lives, and how open, secure, and trusted internet, which we very often refer to and almost became a slogan, actually is an important component if we want to have more innovation and investment on the continent. You mentioned AFRINIC, so I think it might make sense right now to give the floor to Cedric and continue this conversation. But maybe after that, and I'm giving advanced warning to Esteve. Esteve, I would like to bring you on board, because a lot of the language that we have heard from David, I almost thought at some points could be delivered by a European Commission official as well. So I would be very curious to hear and compare what you have to say. But before we do that, let me give the floor to Cedric. Cedric, please.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again for inviting me to this great presentation, to this great meeting. Let me share my screen. I would like to take us through what Afrinic as a regional internet registry does in regard of the subject, which is the cooperating for meaningful internet access in Africa and open standards. First of all, the area function for Africa was a huge milestone back in 2004, because before that, network operators had to rely on area from other region to get IP resources. So for now, it was easier for them to get it, and Afrinic facilitated access for IPv4, IPv6, and ASN for all those network operators. But beyond the network operators, also the institutions that are using internet, that are using a lot of internet resources. And in addition to this is the policy development process, which is now more adapted to the African context. Before that, they had to rely and to comply with regulation from other areas. Now they can build their own policies and make it what they want to be for Africa. Some statistics about what Afrinic did. So more than 115 million of IPv4 addresses that have been already assigned. So more than 1,960 organizations, so from public sector, private sector, academic, and so on. And right now, basically, we more or less deserve 590 million African citizens. In terms of cooperation and partnership, we mainly cooperate with our partners with different projects that we are either leading or doing together. There are so many of them. We also partner with our community members and all the stakeholders at large, and all this to make sure that we increase the internet access. On the other hand, we also build capacity of African engineers. So this is something that Afrinic has been doing for many years, and it's available, it's free, to make sure that the African engineers are able to do IPv6 deployment, routing security, routing public key infrastructure, and to use them accordingly. And also will support the development of internet critical infrastructure, such as IXPs. We also have support to local internet initiatives, mainly sometimes some project, and also the internet governance, which is something that is very important according to us. David mentioned something about the Open Internet Standard Working Group. So we are working in cooperation with Internet Society to build an Open Internet Standard Working Group. Previously it was there, but IETF Africa Working Group, but now we want it to be more no more focus on IETF, but more large. So to promote the open internet standard in Africa, participation to open standard organization. So initially the IETF, but expanding to other organizations. Encourage and guide the participation of Africans to open internet standard development. Encourage the deployment of open internet standards. Organize, coordinate events such as hackathon, workshop, webinar, academic conference, etc. Encourage research activities and capacity building with academics, academic body and actors in relation to open internet standard. So in short, our aim here is to work in the interest of the internet users in Africa, spread best practices on the use of internet numbers, resources, and standards, and all this to ensure that to use it as a critical means for a meaningful internet access in Africa. Thank you again for your attention. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Cedric. I have a quick follow-up question to you. You mentioned the capacity building efforts that you guys undertake when it comes to engineers. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more whether there is also a similar engagement with the policymakers who frequently do not really understand the technical conversations behind the policies that are being proposed, especially when it comes to international negotiations and discussions in the bodies like ITU. So is that something that you, either alone or in partnership with other organizations on the continent, are also involved in to sort of sensitize the policymakers to potential consequences of the technical solutions that are being proposed and originate from other parts of the world, maybe?
Thank you, Patrick, for the question. Right now, Afrinic has used to do face-to-face meetings, face-to-face capacity building events, where our team will go to multiple countries and build capacity of engineers. Mainly, at first, it was directed toward the engineers, but something that we discovered is that also the managers needed to be trained and to be involved in that, in all that capacity building effort. So yes, at first it was mainly technical, so IPv6 and routing, but nowadays we are opening more into policy development and making sure that people knows what we are talking about. And also an effort to be to open it large. We currently have it in multiple languages. So the base language is English, but we have started to translate in French and in Arabic. And all those trainings are currently available online. It is an effort that was started even before the pandemic, but we want to make our base course available to everybody online. And then maybe for a more advanced, either we'll organize face-to-face when possible, or individual sessions or deployathon, as we call them. And all that is actually available for free, and all the information can be taken from our website on afrinic.net. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cedric, for this additional information. So, Estef, I promised to give you the floor now, and I'm very interested to hear your take on the topic. David has also mentioned the importance of infrastructure, which is something that the European Union, for instance, has been quite committed with recent announcements in the State of the Union of global gateways and the importance of trusted infrastructure. So without further ado, I'll give you the floor to talk a bit about what's currently on the EU's agenda and how the EU sees that conversation developing.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me to this event representing the Commission. It's really an honor for me to be here in this particular important event, but also discussing this absolutely crucial question. Indeed, I will take the opportunity that we have such good panelists that you've put together, and also a very broad audience, to explain a bit not only the projects that we have in mind in relation to the global gateway, but also the thinking that we have within the Commission. So we contribute to these exercises of open thinking in public institutions in general. I think it is of course no coincidence that we sing the same song that Afrinic or ISOC or all the other very relevant internet institutions, part of the multi-stakeholder system of internet governance that the European Commission strongly supports, together with the free and open internet. I think we are on the same page on many of these issues, but we also need to really engage together into thinking about the complexities of those issues, because they are indeed growing and they are multifaceted, and they will develop in the next years in very tricky ways. I think that for starters, we think that the the open and free internet is really what makes connectivity fair. There's an intrinsic link that we need to cultivate, the open internet and connectivity. Otherwise, digital connectivity can easily become political and economic dependency. In the Commission, we think really that there is a growing complexity in the interplay between connectivity, the telecom infrastructure that David was telling us about, and the final object of connectivity, which can be the open, free, secure, and properly developed internet. It can be also another internet, which is closer, less developed, more dominated by big private companies. But it can also be completely another technology that is no longer the global internet. And we think that we need to acknowledge that from the very beginning in this new way of thinking about these issues. The relationship between connectivity and the internet is actually being played to a great extent, indeed, in standardization organizations, but also in the way that connectivity markets are being deployed and created. So, just let me start with our basic premise on all this, which is that basically we firmly believe that the current TCP/IP protocol suite, which is actually the internet technology, the core part of the internet technology, and then you have all the open standards associated to it growing around it. This TCP/IP protocol has demonstrated a high level of resilience, scalability, adaptability. It has no problem in enabling the exponential growth of the global internet and online services within the foreseeable future. Basically, there is no evidence that there is a problem with the TCP/IP protocol and the way that it evolves. Internet protocols are in constant evolution, and new requirements such as mobility, new addressing schemes, higher bandwidth, security, new transport layers are currently addressed by the relevant bodies, such as the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, but also the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, the World Wide Web Consortium, the third generation partnership project, the 3GPP. There is a whole ecosystem of bodies which have a very strong consensus within all the multi-stakeholder community that they have the right technical expertise to deal with these issues. And by the way, Europe is recognized to contribute to this standardization process by sending basically individuals, academics, innovators, so relatively small players, but that really conform that technical community that we know works towards solving problems and not politics. And we think that this really shows that the system is open, that African players have more room to be there, be in terms of companies, be in terms of individuals. We have more room to be there. It's an open system, and that we need to cultivate that openness, of course, it's not a given, but we can continue doing that. And Europe is recognized precisely by having these individuals and small players and academics and technical experts autonomously contributing to those standard organizations. So basically, we have no evidence, actually it's the opposite, that the TCP/IP protocol and the current standardization setting is failing in developing internet functionalities and all the foreseeable requirements. For instance, linked to the deployment of artificial intelligence, augmented virtual reality, Internet of Things, etc. And we, of course, are not alone in this analysis. We have many like-minded partners, big countries, small countries, the technical community that concur that that's the situation. And yet, we're really worried, because what we witness is the resurgence of centrifugal forces that are pushing towards a schism, a break, a fundamental break of the system and of this technology that would lead to deep fragmentation and that would basically create a chaos in the technology and the governance of the internet. And this is very simple. This is basically because new proposals aimed at standardizing a completely new stack of internet protocols are being constantly proposed in the context of the International Telecommunications Union. It's as simple as that. That's the ultimate fact. The Commission firmly believes that it's not within the ITU mandate to deal with internet standards and internet governance. It's not the right organization. And this would basically break the international consensus on where and how the internet needs to be developed. So it would really create a problem on the development of the internet. It is also the case that it is not intrinsically wrong to have research projects that think and develop potential alternative internet systems. There are many of those, including in Europe. And in many instances, they are very important contributions to the evolution of the existing internet because they provide knowledge towards that evolution of the existing internet. The fundamental problem, and this is very important to understand, is when these projects move rapidly to the standardization process, which basically, this is 3 steps in advance. Because what it really indicates is that these projects are ready to be deployed. That there is a very strong willingness for those who are proposing these projects to start deploying those alternative standards, which ultimately is an alternative internet, which is not compatible with the existing internet standards, that have no consensus within the technical community, and that would go on top of existing connectivity infrastructures. So it's really the whole process of standardization that it's really very tricky. And you know, the real problem is that we are witnessing a very strong push towards that direction. So what is the EU going to do? Apart from continuing opposing those standardization attempts, we have already very firstly opposed those attempts in ITU, and we managed to block some of them, but we know they are going to continue. So in the following weeks, in the context of the global gateway that the European Commission President von der Leyen announced just a few days ago, as Patrick was mentioning, the EU will launch an outreach campaign to African countries to better understand their open internet connectivity needs in view of strengthening European investments, which will be fully committed to the development of the open internet rather than alternative technologies. And this is important because we think that these alternative technologies might basically lock in and disconnect from global markets entire economic ecosystems if they are ultimately deployed on those countries. We think that it is within the interest of African countries, certainly the multi-stakeholder community, the civil society, etc., to continue opposing attempts to standardize and deploy alternative internets, which, by the way, we think they are not in line with free and open societies. If you look at the concrete architecture of those proposals, they have at its core a centralized control system on that internet. We also want to understand in this project the concerns of African countries in relation to internet governance and current standardization organizations. We are convinced that it is necessary for internet governance debate to remain multi-stakeholder, but we are not for the status quo. We want the multi-stakeholder system to continue evolving deeply, if possible, especially in relation to the concerns of the developing world. So this is, you know, a project that we are going to launch very soon. I'm very excited about it because it really shows, together with the Global Gateway, a new level of commitment, including more resources and more involvement of the EU private sector in providing connectivity solutions at the global level. I'm sure we cannot tell you much more about this at this point because we're really in the process of finalizing the design of such projects. But by the end of the year 2022, for sure, we will have more concrete things to tell you. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Great, thank you, Esteban. I'm sure there will be questions and a follow-up to the presentation you gave. I think what was quite striking is indeed the connection you have made about the potential consequences of these new processes and push for new standards and the impact it might have on the economy, global economy, but also economy and the connectivity between Africa and other parts of the world, in particular Europe. David mentioned in his presentation the importance of trusted connectivity for innovation and investment. And I think here we got the flavor of what might potentially transpire if there is a push and indeed decisions are taken in the sort of the direction of providing these new standards that might sort of fragment the internet as we know it. But you also talked a lot about the possible investment in open internet and how the EU aims to approach the topic. And I would like to bring to the conversation maybe Onika and Daniel at this point. And I would also like to maybe push you to be a bit more critical. You know, I hope, Esteve, you will not mind. I would love to hear from you, Daniel, and Onika, if you wish to add to the original questions I asked. How credible are those declarations? You know, is this music to your ears, or is this something that, you know, African partners have heard before and are maybe a bit more cautious when there's big declarations of investment in open internet are coming from outside of the continent, and how that potentially could be remedied? So Daniel, I hope you don't mind. I'll give the floor to Onika first, and then we'll wrap up this session, this round with you. So Onika, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much. And thank you for asking it so frankly, right? I think our greatest challenge over the years has not necessarily, has been a lack of policy frameworks that, you know, address these issues, but more so, even when we do have these policy frameworks, it's been a lack of implementation. And so I share the same concerns when the commitments are coming from externally, that we need to be at the front and center of this of the implementation. So I'm not really convinced. What I do know, however, is that it is a step in the right direction, and that we are so far behind. If anything, that COVID would have shown us is that even the connectivity that we have, it really shows the inequalities of how we are just simply not meeting people's needs. So for me, I think, you know, where we are is that while we make all these investments in infrastructure, it's really important that we understand the importance, the equal importance of making investment on the demand side of building this broadband infrastructure. And so an adoption and working towards a meaningful connectivity target is really key at this stage. Both, you know, online, I think and offline, we can all agree that, you know, how we've been measuring access to the internet today is actually not serving us very well. That there needs to be a distinction made between someone who checks their email once in a while and someone who's a super user of running their business online, for example, especially since we are talking about digital economies. And that, you know, bundling everyone together in our stats has not served us very well, and actually has masked the true digital inequalities that continue to persist in our region. You know, the difference in online experiences is really where we need to begin to zero in on it. And that is really around how do we develop policy goals that that we consider for quality of the connectivity to enable everyone to benefit from a digitized lifestyle, but also participate in this digital economy. So meaningful connectivity, you know, as a framework to track the components of connectivity that matter in how users are able to access and use the internet in a way that is transformative for them. And just to quickly highlight what, you know, we've done in starting to begin to understand what type of a framework we'd be looking for. The elements would include a fast connection, something I'm struggling with today because I moved to a new location and couldn't even connect to this meeting, hence my video has been off for the most part. So a fast connection, minimum 4G mobile connection is, you know, should be our threshold for making sure that people are able to stream videos for classes. I mean, we keep talking about how there's new opportunities for Africans to take courses, whether through Coursera or wherever, even at Harvard. But without a fast internet for them to connect and engage, that is just simply a dream and not a reality for many more, including those who are actually connected. You know, an appropriate device. I mean, I think, you know, it's really great that we talk about Africa being a mobile first. Sometimes I hear mobile only continent, and that mobile phones have become ubiquitous with, you know, our region. But, you know, a smartphone as a basic minimum item. And even that, I think, you know, down the line, we will begin to question whether a smartphone alone is sufficient to say people are connected in a way that they can have their educational, financial, and comprehensive lives on digital platforms and engage equally with their counterparts in a global marketplace. So a minimum of a smartphone to ensure that they're able to connect, but also enough data. And we know that this is a big issue. It goes down to affordability in this region. Other regions, you know, people are used to having unlimited data, but we still are in a region where predominantly prepaid market place, and data is still extremely expensive. Some countries, people spending as much as 20% of average monthly income to be able to purchase data. So, you know, agreeing that an unlimited access to broadband connection at home or place of work or study is our minimum standard in order for us to say we have a connected society is you know, one of the thresholds we need to begin to consider, as well as regular access to the internet. So not this, you know, I've got access when on Tuesday and Wednesday when I'm in this area, and then on the other days I'm offline. But people who want to be online should have the opportunity to have daily access and be able to have the requisite skills to utilize the internet on a frequent and regular basis. So circling back to your question, I think that, you know, this reinforcement around investing and doubling down on infrastructure in the sector is really great. And I think it's going to take more than just our own government. It's going to take more than just private sector. It will require the support of our partners from other regions, as well as investors from other regions. So it's a multi-stakeholder approach towards making sure that everyone has access not only to affordable internet, but also to is connected in a way that is meaningful to effect a transformed life. Thank you.
Thank you, Onika. You put a lot of issues on the table, so I'll have a few follow-up questions to you in a second. I'll give you the advanced warning. You know, you expressed your let's say hesitation to jump completely on board of the new declarations and sort of give unequivocal support of your judgment to say, you know, that's something we definitely want and we believe in. There, you have certain reservations, and my question would be, how could it work? How can the Europeans do their job better? Because I don't think anybody here doubts the intentions, but how do you actually create those not meaningful, well, the meaningful connectivity, but meaningful connectivity not only in terms of infrastructure, but meaningful connectivity between people as partners as well. So think about this for a second. I also like the fact that you stress the issue of digital inequalities, and something to think about maybe for all of us throughout the session is to what extent this alternative version of the internet developed for new standards could actually accelerate inequality between citizens. You know, if it's already so hard when we work with a unified set of protocols, once we start diverging, where does that actually leave us? So let's maybe come back to that later. And now, Daniel, thank you for your patience. I'll bring you to the conversation. And maybe one of the issues I would like you to plug into your intervention is, this focus that has been really coming up for different interventions of different adjectives that we use in front of connectivity. We have heard fairness, we have heard meaningful, we have heard trustful. But how do we actually achieve that, and should we think about the standards, infrastructure, so that that vision actually is something that people can definitely buy into and jump on this multi-stakeholder effort really with sleeves rolled up and fully committed to the cause?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patrick, and the panelists, and thank you very much to the participants. So my name is Daniel, and I am sitting in for Wakabi Wairagala, the Executive Director of CIPESA, the very kind conveners and partners of this event. So I welcome you all once again. And I hope I will fill into the big shoes. Yeah, very well. I would like to start by a quote by Claude Shannon. So Claude Shannon is, so to speak, the father of information theory. And he conceptualized this in 1948. And this information theory is basically the foundation upon which the digital economy and the internet is built. He said, we may have knowledge of the past, but cannot control it. We may control the future, but we have no knowledge of it. You might make whatever you please of that quote, but I feel the quote very well sits into this conversation on open standards and how to push for meaningful conversation moving forward. And as we've had different panelists, for me, it's rather evident that on one side, we have more of the technical minded or the technical conversations. Then on the other side, we have more policy oriented people who are kind of, pushing for more meaningful access and kind of trying to lessen the gap on digital inequality. So my attempt in this regard and to basically set the conversation moving, I would like to reconcile basically the conversation on the technical side in a more policy language and the conversations from the policy side in a more technical language. And I hope I will do it justice. So Africa, and specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, is caught between new technologies and old technologies. What do I mean? On many global rankings, Sub-Saharan Africa comes at the bottom. Think of extreme poverty, think of internet access and the like. But on the other, Africa, and specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, comes at the top. Things like leapfrogging into the mobile economy, things like mobile money, which are very good points through which we can actually build our conversation. But what does it mean for quality or for the nature of access? As Onika has talked about earlier, there might be a proportionate growth in, say, access in mobile devices. There should be about 98% geographical coverage for example, in East Africa. But what is the quality of this? And a recent report by Analysis Mason shows that there is at least a 46 access gap. So for each 100% that have access to the internet, it's only 46% who are accessing it in some sort of way. And this poses rather interesting questions. So do we optimize for the older technologies that Africa is benefiting from, such as USSD, the ones that are powering mobile telephony, such as mobile money and the like, at the expense of the newer technologies that are built over the top, that have promise of delivering even better digital services, including commerce, e-commerce, banking, e-banking, and things like the Internet of Things. And this kind of takes me back to the main point where the stakeholders in this regard, the governments, businesses, have a stake, but how much control do they have? And this is where the critical juncture comes in. Although Steve kind of articulates the EU's position, there are several positions, and although some of the conversations are moving towards many networks, what does not come out prominently is the many visions. So what are the interests of particular groups in this grand scheme of things? And I would like to draw your attention to governments. At the beginning of the conversation, Dawit from Internet Society spoke very well of how there's been advancements in infrastructure, at least post 2009. But also, incidentally, post 2009 is when governments woke up to the harsh realities, or to the control that threatened, rather to the control that the internet gave to masses that threatened their absolute power. And in this case, I can draw you back to the 2011 Arab Spring that swept across North Africa and the Middle East. And I can also draw to you things like the WikiLeaks and the Snowden revelations. And we can see that it was from this point that very many African countries, especially the government, started thinking about how do we entrench ourselves into power? How do we control narratives? How do we surveil against dissidents? How do we, weaponize the war against terrorism and, follow up on people who we think are threats to our power? And also, who are the new alliances that we might come up with? And here I'm framing in terms of the African language. So this really brought about a clash in visions. And I would like to tell you something that's rather surprising. Just a few months ago, the most progressive country in sub-Saharan Africa, Mauritius, had proposals towards breaking encryption, literally, because they are arguing that online content is problematic, and they would like to surveil it, or to basically study network traffic at the mobile user device end, which at least from a very policy side, or from a very the aspect of democracy and personal freedom and liberty, is a massive threat. So we have moved from totalitarian countries in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa being interested in controlling the internet and having new alliances that actually threaten some of the open ideals the internet was built on, to now more progressive countries having a similar thinking. And this is provocative in terms of thinking of what alliances and what partnerships very many countries are building. And I mean, we cannot mention this enough. And this is hopefully my second last point, the importance of infrastructure investment. 70% of all 4G infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa is built by one company, Huawei. And almost 46%, nearly even 50-something% of mobile devices in sub-Saharan Africa are supplied by one original equipment manufacturer, which is Techno. And most of these brands that are emerging from the East have permeated the markets. And of course, this has unique implications because, just drawing you back to Claude Shannon's quote, we may have control of the future, but we don't have knowledge of it. So where is the control falling? Is it falling with original equipment manufacturers who might have their own ideals, but yet are equally selling uniquely priced, I should say competitively priced, and even high quality products? And this goes the same for network installations, where local telecommunication companies are getting fairly and highly competitive equipment that has permeated all over the continent. And this brings us, brings me to my kind of final point. So what is at stake, and how can we collectively participate in this internet economy? How can governments participate in meaningful ways that not only balance their control, in a very Weberian sense, they have the monopoly on violence and enforcing the territorial control, but also how do we get other stakeholders such as academia, such as the private sector, to invest more into R&D. And for me, this is why I began with a quote from Cloud Shannon. I mean, it's a little bit academic, but just to give you a quick story on 5G, it's as academic as it can get. And there is this Turkish scholar who was in the US at MIT, who basically came up with this new innovation on how to basically have a more optimal transfer of data across networks. And this was as recent as 2005. And some of these technologies were adopted in the new 5G standards that we saw implemented in 2006 and 16. So for me, this conversation, and I hope I speak to both the technical communities and the policy communities, it should not just be about balancing interests against surveillance, digital rights, and I guess digital inequalities, but also kind of looking at what happens at the table. You know, when all of these big companies are negotiating, and indeed at different fora, such as the Internet Engineering Task Force, such as the 3GPP, and other relevant bodies, it's often speaking in language which is not accessible by the policy side, but also kind of fronting the interests of their countries or of their corporations. And this is where we need to get Africa on the board to speak the languages that are spoken in ways that also prioritize Africa's interests. In that way, we can balance on how to move between the old technologies, such as USSD, where we are prospering right now, to the new technologies, the ones that are promising to, deliver massive digital dividends, especially if harnessed very well. With that, I really beg to submit, and I thank you very much for your attention and time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So I like that you start with the quote. Let me push back a bit on the quote. I agree. Yes, we don't have a knowledge of the future, but we have a control. And I think that's actually a very good point to have the conversation about anticipating some of the negative consequences of the issues that might be happening in the future. And this sort of conversation about the infrastructure and affordability keeps coming back, and some of the conversations I've had in the past, the argument about affordability and accessibility of a new technology for development and growth was very often clearly juxtaposed with some other concerns, like those about security of cyberspace, or let's say its open, free, and global nature. So I'm wondering, how do you think actually that it can be balanced, and how should the governments be balancing that equation? I think there is quite a significant risk, of having indeed one provider delivering all parts of the infrastructure and pushing for some regulatory solutions, completely overtaking control and putting on the table solutions that maybe the governments and citizens and other stakeholders in Africa would necessarily want to see. So how do you think? What do you think would be the right way to approach that? Where should the governments be looking for advice and sort of come out with this conundrum where development, economic growth is sometimes in clear opposition to other considerations that have much more longer term implications for the state as such? Daniel, a quick reaction?
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually thought it was a question to the panel. So I mean, I really belabor to find any easy answers in this regard, but at least thinking on a very top level, especially at the Africa Union level. And I mean, if for example, the Africa Continental trade pact comes into realization, Africa would be the largest, the AU would be the largest economic bloc in the world at about $1.3 trillion. Even larger than the EU, I must put that. So most of the conversations happening at the top level, at the AU level, might have much promise, or might actually kind of harmonize ways through which very many African countries are committed towards balancing their economic interests vis-a-vis, maybe I should say, political interests. And as Onika mentioned earlier, there hasn't been much coordinated movement of troops, and I can draw you to the Africa Union convention, the convention on cyber security and personal data protection, the so-called, I think, Malabo Convention, which basically I think is fantastic in its right of guaranteeing personal data privacy, almost similar to the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, but also kind of proposing cyber security regimes that can be adopted. But of course, in its current framing, it's not yet been effected because, of course, countries are moving at their own pace, or there hasn't been at least some sort of political will. So having something that binds, or some sort of common ideals or common benchmarks, and this is not only within, like say the convention on personal data and on cybersecurity and personal data, but it might range from some of the declarations such as by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, specifically the principles on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa, which we believe, and I personally think, are really great examples and can be good ways through which rights of like freedom of expression and access to information in the internet age can be understood and can be collectively implemented. But of course, at the end of the day, I think very many governments and countries just, at the end of the day, it's all about retaining absolute power. And they would be able to breach that at the expense of the greater good. I mean, there's a common example that a country I cannot really mention now, but they were able to withdraw from an African court just because the jurisdiction of the court would prohibit them from prosecuting a dissident. And this is the current reality. So transitioning from that, or making the collective good more attractive. And I particularly think like the EU's investment in internet exchange points. I think the project is called Axis, or is it by the government of Luxembourg, that really prioritized how to invest in internet exchange points, but basically keeping traffic local and reducing the latency, but also promoting local use and local content. I feel those are really important and helpful. But how can I frame it? If bodies like Afrinic and other regional bodies do not have, I mean, if the cost of breaching rules such as internet shutdowns and filtering and breaching regional court jurisdiction, if the costs are not high, then perhaps these governments might go ahead and keep on acting with impunity or with arbitrary kind of decisions at the cost of the greater good. So I'm trying to say that collectively, the incentives must be good, must be great. If the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection has great incentives for very many countries, then they will jump on board. But fairly, there should be a commensurate cost towards breach of this. I mean, I'm not calling for a global policing force or for countries to go out to go at each other, but I kind of think and strongly feel that this is a way to balance these conflicting interests between maintaining absolute control and potential digital dividends that might emerge from the internet economy.
Great, thank you, Daniel. So I would like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions and comments, of course, to the discussion that's happening via Q&A box, wherever you're watching us. David, Steph, and Cedric, I would like to point to your attention that we already have 2 questions asked in the Q&A box. So I will come back to you in a second for your initial reactions. But now I would like to bring Onika to the discussion. I promise to give you the floor so that you can tell us how to do better when it comes to the engagement between Europe and Africa, so that it's actually more meaningful, as we've already established, but also maybe get your reflections on the potential impact of these new developments on digital inequalities that you've been talking about so extensively. And if I could ask you to sort of try to keep it to 3-4 minutes, that would be great. Thank you, Onika. We cannot hear you.
Muted, yes. Okay, great. So yes, let me just quickly though, just go back to this issue of the value of these commitments rather, and that's because Daniel said something that really resonates with this frustration of declarations that just simply there, but it's just kind of at some point it sort of feels like a performative exercise of signing on to these declarations. And I think for me, the EU has been a really critical voice in the importance of this investment in digital infrastructure. And I think that we would want to also hear the voices. And it's unfortunate that sometimes governments will value those voices more so than the voice of their own citizens. And so when we have instances like internet shutdowns as a good example, which is a suppression of this freedom that we say people have access to through the internet and other ways, that there would also be, we need to begin to think about how we respond beyond just being quiet and acknowledging and counting which internet is off. What should be the consequences? How do we navigate as partners? How do we hold each other accountable for the values and principles that we've agreed to in terms of moving this forward? So, so thank you. Let me just get back to the issue of inequality. I think, one of the things that has really happened and perhaps maybe made our job easier, but also just quite shocking, is just how COVID pandemic exposed our inequalities. And I would actually go to the extent of saying that it actually showed us how much deeper they are than we thought, because then, it became less about just being able to have the connectivity and the affordability, but because we found ourselves in a space and time where everyone needed to be online and needed to be able to enjoy these digital dividends that we talk about investing in. Our systems just were really overwhelmed in terms of both technically being able to have everyone operate online, but also in terms of the kinds of policy frameworks that we have to ensure that not only that people have access to the internet, but consumer protection issues as well as freedom of information. Just so much happened during this period of the past 18 months or so to show us that we've really done a lot with few people online, but there's still just quite a lot more that needs to be done. So I would really say that for me, it's important for us to begin to set the targets of what it is that, what does a connected Africa and digital societies look like for us, and begin to set those targets that are measurable so that we are holding ourselves accountable and working towards making sure that, you know, and I want us to actually probably even move from talk of, you know, connecting everyone. Yes, we want everyone to be online, but what are the specific targets of how we aim to achieve that within the next year, within the next 2 years, no longer the 2030, 2060 goals? Can we just accept that there's some really urgent needs when it comes to connecting everyone in the region? And what are the short-term goals of, you know, 2 to 3 years, and what are the medium-term goals of 5 to 10 years? And that's largely because if you think about what we were advocating for 5 years ago, so much has changed on the technology side that even our 1 for 2 affordability target of no more than 2% for 1 gig of data actually doesn't make sense, because we've all exhausted 1 gig of data in just the amount of time that we've been on this webinar. And so if we're saying that people should spend no more than 2% per month on 1 gig of data, what exactly are we saying? So perhaps it's really time for us to interrogate some of these standards, but most importantly, attach some realistic targets for each country. And those will look different from a country like South Africa to a country that's more inland and, you know, spends differently in terms of, you know, broadband access, like Chad, I think would be a good example to compare that. You know, so looking at each country's population and setting some targets that are meaningful for that country, but, you know, some short-term outcomes. And I'm hoping that we, you know, the EU partnership also holds us accountable to that as we begin to review, we don't sign on to new statements, but that we really reflect on how we've performed and how do we do better, and what are the quick wins that we can look towards, you know. So for example, an issue of connecting schools, it just really drives me nuts that, you know, almost all the countries in Africa signed on to the UN's, you know, keeping children learning everywhere. Yet we knew very well that we've got 80% of rural populations that don't have connectivity. So how were we planning to do that when we signed on and celebrated with these commitments? So another, I don't want to abuse meaningful, but we need to be meaningful in our intentions as well, and very intentional rather, in us signing on to these declarations and, you know, holding ourselves accountable to making sure that we perform accordingly. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Annika. So it's quite interesting that you mentioned accountability, because we usually work with the assumption that the reason why countries like China are so successful on the African continent is that because the investment comes without strings attached. Here I hear the opposite call, that actually the European engagement should be calling for more accountability when it comes to the specific commitments. But also what I pick in your intervention is that actually beyond the big declarations, whatever we do needs to have real impact, because this is what people ultimately see. And I think that's an important lesson to be kept in mind. Now, we have about 13 minutes left. I would like to maybe read the questions we have from the chat and distribute them among our panelists. So we have, I'll read them aloud without any corrections, so hopefully you'll get the questions. The first one is about standards for digital and internet usage. Has the research on them been inclusive and conclusive to have standards in place that cater for especially the specific regional needs? African countries that have just been connected to the global economy and era of digital technology. So in other words, I read this question as, how is the current conversation being adapted for the specific African context, and how can regional actors shape that discussion? The second question we have, with big thanks to all the presenters, what are the main reasons that weaken African countries' more impactful participation in processes around internet standards and policy? What needs to change? So again, I think that both questions link a bit more how to ensure more meaningful participation from African stakeholders in those discussions, but also maybe how to actually make sure that those positions do really represent what societies want. I mean, there is a group of countries that do support calls for the new IP, for instance, and the proposals that are made by China, just to name a few, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Nigeria, or Senegal or Zambia. So how can we actually ensure that those countries as well carry the voices, maybe that are sometimes different than the official government positions? And then finally, the question that maybe you, Steph, would want to take: should Africa's engagement with Europe on the matters at hand be pushed by the African Union, or are there other entities that are better placed to play that role? So to reversing the question a bit, who do you think, or who is the EU identifying as a sort of a main interlocutor for this conversation? I'll throw maybe one more question into the discussion, because we may not have time to come back to that second round. But some of you in the interventions have mentioned this very clear conflict between the current bottom-up approach to standardization for different standardization bodies and regional stakeholders versus the top-down approach that is being proposed. And I think next year we're going to have the meeting of the World Telecommunication Standardization Assembly, where I guess we can expect some of those conversations to be put on the table. And Steph, if you feel comfortable, maybe I'll put you on the spot there. What are the Europeans expecting to take place there, and maybe what are the sort of lessons and the pointers you could share with the African partners to keep an eye on as everybody gets ready for those meetings? So let me maybe start in the order of presentations. If I could ask each of you to take about 3 minutes so that we don't go too much over time. David, I will start with you.
Thank you. I have answered to one of the questions online, so I'm not going to come back on that. With regards to the question from Brenda on the considerations to ensure that countries that have that have restrictions to access to social media, etc., are not left behind. Well, I know that more and more African countries are currently trying to have regulations that restrict access to internet, or at least to social media and so on. And not only that, you mentioned that some countries have accepted at least to consider new IP, and we'll see many things like that. I think this comes from the discomfort that some African governments have with regards to the internet as it is today. Daniel said that, well, they just want to cling to their power and so on. I agree with him only partially, because African governments are more and more democratic. There are more and more African countries compared to maybe 10 years, 20 years ago, that are more democratic. So there are countries that are doing that because they just want to make sure that they stay in power forever. But there are others who have real concerns. For example, social media is creating a lot of challenges in those countries. And if the internet as it is today does not try to bring solutions to them, they will flip the other side. Therefore, it is important not to completely disregard their concerns and really try to find ways to answer to those questions. The OTT problem is another thing. The internet has taken a lot of income from government because the telecommunication, as it was before, was a big source of income for many governments. The internet is not, when you see directly. So these concerns should be taken seriously, and there should be discussions, and hopefully there should be solutions to those issues, and not just saying, well, we shouldn't, these are not concerns. They are real concerns that we should take into consideration. And I am sure there are solutions within the internet, but they have to come in a very well concerted way. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. Cedric, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the question. I will jump directly to the second question. I think that David already mentioned a lot of good things about the first one, and I will say that one of the major challenge that we have when it comes to impactful participation is, I would say, it's the lack of participation from Africans. I would say in those forums, and it is more. I won't say that it's ignorance, but it's more due to the fact that people are not aware. It's lack of awareness. Yes, it's an awareness problem where people are not aware that they can actually they can participate to forums, they can participate to discussions. You have a lot of internet standards discussion that are open. Yes, some are closed, but you also have others that are open where one vote, it's equal to one person. So whoever you are, whatever company or institution you represent, your vote is one and it counts. And also another thing that people don't know is when it comes to closed forum, I would say, for instance, ITU discussions where you need to be members to actually attend the forum, the netizen have that ability that possibility for them to talk to their government, talk to their representative, and make sure that they understand what they are going to talk about. And now to come to what needs to change, I would say that it's more the involvement not of government, but involvement of people. People need to involve themselves more into those discussions. And this is why, for instance, we have that open internet standard working group that we want to use to actually build that community where we make sure that people have what they need to participate. People are encouraged and people are actually guide on how they can participate. I won't take more time about that on the subject. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Cedric. Let me now jump to Onika.
Yes, so I think I'm going to echo some of what has been said earlier, and just, this conversation for me re-emphasizes the importance of continuously educating people about the importance of engagement in digital rights issues, and just really understanding what they get into when they operate online. I definitely don't think that restricting people from participating and engaging in platforms is the solution. I think the solution is really how we empower citizens and educate them to be able to participate in these conversations, and understand that these conversations are equally important as those that they've engaged in other civil society forums. There's definitely a trust deficit that exists between government and citizens, and doing digital education and educating citizens about digital rights could be one way of beginning to rebuild that trust, but also making sure that the regulators understand that they're there to regulate for the competition and all of that, but also they're there to regulate in a way that protects consumers. And I think that's where the disconnect has also been, for the most part, is that helping consumers and educating them and empowering them so that they are able to engage in these kinds of forums in a way that advances their digital rights as well, because they are definitely important. And I just really think that shutting platforms off just does not, it's a short-term solution. It's the same thing with children. I often advocates that you educate your kids and empower them to self-govern online as opposed to restrict them completely from being online, because online world is not that very separate and different from our offline worlds as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Onika. Daniel, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Fantastic points raised by my colleague panelists. I will also echo and just say that, policy frameworks and regulations might be slow, but they are real. On the other hand, standards have to happen almost immediately, because networks and basically systems run because they're contingent upon standards. Historically, African countries have not really been involved, and I think this kind of answers Nevada's and Brenda's question. But Dawit raises very important concerns that these, threats being raised by some of the problematic content on social media and other internet fora are things that we should consider. But also speaking most in regard to the trust deficit, which I think is the most important thing. Very many stakeholders or governments think that adopting new technologies, irrespective of the origin of the standard, irrespective of the values locked in the standards, is basically a replacement of the trust deficit. So this doesn't only apply to 5G, NR, it also applies to biometric databases, also applies to digital ID, also applies to cryptocurrencies, especially central bank-driven cryptocurrencies and the like. So by basically not just falling to technology or black box technology as a replacement of trust, for me, it really stands out. But also, maybe it's also a call for African governments to invest in R&D. I know it's a bit paradoxical to ask someone who has no bread to eat cake, but I feel it's an important conversation, important consideration that must be put at the front. And with that said, I would like to thank you all very much for the great contributions.
Great, thank you, Daniel, and thank you for joining us so early in the morning or so late in the night. I don't know what would be the right description. We can go a few minutes over, so thank you to the organizers for allowing us that. Esteve, we'll give you the floor last. If you could take up to 3-4 minutes max, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for all these very interesting comments and questions and visions. I would really like to talk more than 3 minutes, but I know it's not possible and you would get bored probably with me talking. So I will just let me mention, because I don't want to transmit an oversimplification of what the Global Gateway is. The Global Gateway is, as announced by the president, will really be an opportunity to take stock and give more visibility to many initiatives that are going on already in Africa and developing countries that are undertaken by the EU. And this is something that worries us a bit, because, for example, in terms of direct investment, the EU, I was looking for the numbers, which are quite striking. The EU has a direct investment stock of 222 billion in Africa, while the US has 42 billion and China has 38 billion. So a different question is whether this investment is properly shaped, is directed really to critical digital infrastructures, is intelligent, it really connects with the needs of African players, African governments, connectivity markets. That's a completely different question. The Global Gateway is an opportunity to take stock of all this, to unite projects and programs that deal with demand-side digitization projects, that deal and try to explain the regulatory approach that we have on the open internet here in Europe, to promote it also in other regions. That we have ongoing discussions around the Digital Services Act that will put a framework into digital platforms, the Digital Markets Act, we have the GDPR. So it's a very complex package that goes beyond digital. It also covers issues related to infrastructure. The Open Internet project, the outreach strategy that we will apply is just one part of this. But really the premise, I think that it links with this new philosophy, which is we really want to better understand what's going on the ground, really take note of all the concerns of really the market dynamics, etc., and then go together into being more intelligent into those highly strategic elements. Because at the end, I think that really what counts is that we want to create links, not dependencies. And I think that we all agree that there is a strong risk that the current context creates dependencies in the context of digitization, especially. And this is really to be avoided. So I just wanted to say this very quickly, because I didn't want to transmit a too superficial image of the global gateway as announced. And then the second thing that relates to standards and the standardization, one of the things that we could do together is really think about ways in which both Africans and Europeans, because we are also a bit frustrated in that field, can have a better participation in standardization organizations. So this is something that will for sure be part of this outreach, and we can push together, because we are on many instances we are on the same site. We have different problematics, but the core problems of the multi-stakeholder governance system, we share them. So that's really an opportunity to do that. Now, to finish, I think you, Patrick, mentioned something that is very relevant, that also relates to this participation in standardization organizations. Indeed, in March 2022, there's going to be this big standardization conference of ITU in Geneva, and this is a few months ahead. It's almost certain that the proponents of this new internet will come back in that forum, and this is very tricky because it's a very closed process. That's among the reasons why we don't want this to be dealt in ITU. It will be a question of gathering votes to support the standardization of the new internet in that conference. It's as simple as that. And it will be only ITU members. And by the way, the Commission is not a member, but EU member states are members and will be bluntly opposed to that, to vote for the approval of not. This is very important that we really mobilize, and this was mentioned by the panelists as well, the pressure as much as possible for African governments, developing countries, etc., all basically EU member states, to not support this. Basically because if the thing gets standardized, then the deployment is just one step ahead, right? Especially if the infrastructure is part of a single company. Deploying an internationally recognized standard in ITU, which is voluntary, but at the same time legally binding because it connects with issues related to the World Trade Organization. So it's a complex infrastructure, but it's very delicate. Then we are in a mess, really. And this is in March 2020. So I just wanted to point out that that's a crucial date for us. It will be extremely political, and we have to really raise awareness to those who will have a vote in that context, because the consequences can be very significant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Steph. To recall the quote that Daniel used, now we have the knowledge and we have the control. So I think the choices we'll be making, the actions are really up to us right now. Thank you all for the great discussions. To those of us who have followed us, I'm sure this is not the last time we are talking about this topic. So please stay tuned, because even as Steph has mentioned, there is a whole outreach planned in the coming months regarding Open Internet project. Now, what I really take from this session as well is this importance of awareness raising and involving the right stakeholders. And that's something that we have tried to do for years now. And I'm very grateful to CIPESA and FIV Africa for giving us a platform to engage with all of you on this very important topics. I only have one thing left, which is to thank our interpreters and the technical staff for the hard work in preparing this session. And I would like to invite you to join all other sessions during CPESA. It's the last day, so please make sure you don't miss any of them. And thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And again, thank you very much to my panelists who have done an excellent job in dealing with the difficult questions that I've been raising. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.